Hi everyone, it's January 20th, and we are here to discuss Japan's upcoming snap election. I'm Kalpana, working as an analyst at APAC Assistance. We also have Information Director Raga with us, who will be providing inputs on the topic. Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi confirmed the timeline of the elections yesterday. The lower house's resolution will take place on January 23rd, and the campaigning for the elections will begin on January 27th, and the voting and counting will be held on February 8th. Now, this sets the stage for a fast and very politically charged election. However, there are multi layered contexts to this decision. To understand why this decision matters, it is important to note that snap elections are a rather recurring feature of modern Japanese politics. Over more than 7 decades, the lower house has completed its full 4 year term only once. If these elections are held as planned, this would be Japan's third national election in just 16 months. Now, this raises several concerns about political fatigue and policy continuity in Japan. Now, Raga, if you could provide us some insights into why Takaichi has called for the elections now.
Sure, Kalpana. Thank you for the brief and the overview of the situation. Now, when we're looking at Japan and why Takaichi is calling for the election, it is quite simply the peak of her political popularity, where she has a lot of leverage. She has exceptionally high approval ratings at this point of time. There's a lot of optics around her, and there is the historic momentum, of course, of being Japan's first female prime minister. But to be honest, there's very little concrete policy delivery so far. In Japanese politics, this combination creates a rather narrow window, and she is moving into lock in power before it closes. At the same time, we're also seeing that the Liberal Democratic Party as an institution remains weak. This is the party that is the ruling party. The public trust in the LDP is quite damaged from the scandals that we saw in 2023 and 2024, the slush fund scandal specifically.
Right.
And the party only holds the lower house by the slimmest of margins, and it lacks control of the upper house altogether. So, by calling an election now, Takaichi is trying to convert her popularity into parliamentary strength. She's looking at reasserting her authority over her own party and pretty much stabilizing within the ruling coalition that has looked fragile over the last couple of months. And there is also the other element of um, the economic headwinds. We're looking at a weakening yen. We're looking at rising interest rates and cost of living pressures that have been affecting the public. And Takaichi understands that approval ratings tend to fall once these realities harden and they bite. So, this election is less about responding to an immediate crisis, which is usually why we see snap elections being called, and it's more about preempting any future vulnerability.
Right. Thanks for those insights. Now, talking about the opposition bloc and the national diet in Japan, how would you characterize the current state of opposition parties ahead of the snap elections in February?
Well, if you look at the opposition right now, it is in the middle of a major realignment. It's driven by urgency rather than ideological alignment. The Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan, the CDPJ, and Komaito have agreed to dissolve themselves into a new party. It's yet to be named. And this is an attempt to consolidate their centrist and center left vote ahead of the election. Their leaders are positioning this as a response to a rightward shift in government policy and the collapse of Komaito's long-standing alliance with the LDP after the funding scandal that we saw. Strategically, this is about relevance, it's about survival, rather than, like I said, it's not really about ideological alignment. On their own, these opposition parties lack the numbers and they also lack the momentum to challenge a very popular prime minister right now. So, unity is seen as the only strategy to present voters with an alternative. Even so, they still remain at a disadvantage because the ruling bloc holds a slim majority in the lower house, and Takaichi does enjoy her public approval. So the opposition's hope is that a unified banner can blunt that advantage to the maximum extent and attract lawmakers from smaller parties, independents, and they're looking at reframing the election as a contest between a right-leaning camp and a centrist alternative. But then again, it is a high-risk gamble and it is being made under a lot of time pressure.
True. Plus, the snap elections will put a lot of pressure on both the governing political party and the opposing political party. So, we'll see a lot of different campaigns coming up. Now, I want to cover off on a few voter concerns. The dominant issue in Japan, as always, remains the economy. As you mentioned, the persistent yen depreciation, the rising import costs, and the ongoing inflation has put a lot of pressure on the households. Given this, Takaichi has proposed the expansion of government spending, such as raising defense spending to about 2% of the GDP and investing in import dependent strategic industries. Now, this has triggered public skepticism rather than assurance. So, the voters are likely to consider these major issues as they go into the elections. Additionally, we have seen the rise of tensions in the region between China and Japan, which has been also a reason for recurring localized protests in Tokyo over recent weeks. Raga, how do you see China's pressure campaign over Prime Minister Takaichi's Taiwan remarks in November affecting Japan's domestic politics and her decision to call a snap election?
Well, China has not taken some of Takaichi's Taiwan remarks very kindly, but its pressure tactics have actually backfired politically, at least in the domestic space. Beijing assumed that Takaichi's administration was weak and that it would retreat. But what we've seen is it has reinforced her image as a firm leader. And some of these travel warnings that we saw being issued, the propaganda campaign, and export controls have been interpreted by Japanese voters less as legitimate diplomacy and more as bullying by China. So that has
Yeah.
actually kept her approval ratings afloat. And looking at this rare alignment of public support and a national security sentiment, Takaichi is moving to close in and capitalize on this moment through this snap election and strengthen her parliamentary base, even if it means that China will be sidelined temporarily in terms of bilateral relations.
Right. Thanks for those inputs on the upcoming elections. As for the concluding remarks, this snap election is going to shape up to be a very high stakes referendum on leadership rather than just policy detail. Prime Minister Takaichi is seeking to translate her personal popularity and a tough security stance into a lasting political authority for herself and the party, while the opposition is scrambling to unify under intense time pressure because of the snap elections. The outcomes of this election will determine not only the balance of power in the national diet, but also the direction of Japan's economic management and regional diplomacy, particularly with China, over the next several years. Thank you, everyone, for listening in, and we'll see you next week.